Okay, so we're going to start off with the superficial backline. The superficial backline connects and protects the posterior side surface of the body. So it starts from the surface of the phalanges, up the gastrocnemius, up the hamstrings, along the rectus spinae, all the way up to the epicranial fascia, and then to the frontal bone. So the postural function is to keep the body in extension, except for from the knees down where it helps with flexion. And then the movement function is to create extension and hyperextension of the body, except for the knees down again, which is flexion. So a good way to engage the superficial backline would be to do an exercise or stretch that involves flexion of the whole body except for the knees down, which would then be doing extension. And although the superficial backline is supposed to work to create extension from the knees up, it should allow for flexion from the knees up. So here is a stretch that you can do to engage your superficial backline. If you just put your whole upper body into flexion, and then keep your from the knees down straight so that they're in extension, this should engage the superficial backline. So for the superficial backline, it connects the anterior surface of the body. So it starts from the dorsal surface of the phalanges up to the patella, along the rectus femoris and the quadricep muscles, up to the anterior inferior iliac spine, and then from the pelvic it goes up to the fifth rib, and then up and splits to the sternocleidomastoid, to the mastoid process, and finally it connects at the back along the lambodial suture. So the postural function is to support the superficial backline, and it supports from the top by lifting the parts that go beyond the gravity line, like the rib cage or your face. And then the movement function is to do flexion at the hips and the trunk, and then from the knees it does extension and then dorsiflexion at the foot. At the neck it does lower cervical flexion and upper cervical hyperextension. Because the superficial front line does fast flex movements, it uses mostly fast twitch fibers. Although the superficial front line does flexion at the trunk, it should be able to do extension and even hyperextension. And just the same goes for the knees. Since it does extension, it should be able to do knee flexion. So a good stretch would be one that does knee flexion and extension or hyperextension of the trunk. Here is an example. So here we have hyperextension at the trunk and flexion at the knee. So the lateral line goes along the lateral side of your body. So it starts at the first and fifth metatarsal bases of your foot, then goes up to the lateral tibial condyle, and then up all the way to the ASIS and the PSIS. Then it crisscrosses all the way up along until the mastoid process and the occipital ridge. Postural function of the lateral line is that it balances front and back and left and right, and it mediates the forces between all the other superficial lines. The movement function is that it creates a lateral bend in the body, and it functions as an adjustable brake for lateral and rotational movement. So, for example, it makes walking a lot smoother, and it helps coordinate the trunk and legs and movements that involve the arms. To engage the lateral line, any kind of lateral flexion and abduction of the leg will work. So here is one example. Lateral flexion and abduction. The spiral line goes across like the whole entire body. Starting from the occipital ridge and the mastoid process, it goes to the lower cervical to the rhomboids major and minor, to the serratus anterior, to the lateral ribs, to the external obliques, to the linea alba, to the internal obliques, to the ASIS, to the tensor fasciae latae, all the way down to the tibialis anterior. So to get a better idea of the posterior side, if we look at the occipital ridge in the masseter process atlas again, you go from there and it goes straight down the rector spinae, down the sacrum, all the way down the bicep femoris to the fibular head, and then from there it goes down to the first metatarsal base. Postural function is to help maintain balance in all the planes and to determine efficient knee tracking and walking. Movement function is to create and mediate spirals and rotations in the body and to steady the trunk and leg during eccentric and isometric contractions. The spiral line will be engaged and stretched by any type of rotational and twisting movement. So here is an example. The twisting will activate the spiral line. The lines discussed, the front and back functional lines are the least involved in postural. Front has the humerus, the lower pec, part of the lateral side of the rectus abdominis, and then the adductor. Back is from the shaft of the humerus to the latissimus dorsi down to the gluteus maximus to the vastus lateralis to the patella and linea aspera of the femur.